How I Met Your Mother invented lots of hyper-specific rules and pseudo-scientific theories. It almost looks like a running gag, just clever writers making great sitcom jokes. But look closer at Ted, Barney, Robin, Marshall, and Lily, and a pattern starts to emerge. Why did this group need so many theories in the first place? Across 9 seasons, someone is always introducing another theory. Whenever a relationship gets complicated, or when life just stops making sense for a minute, another rule shows up to explain it. I used to be too busy enjoying the theories to notice the question they all seem to be asking. But in reality, we all have our own versions too. Everything happens for a reason, or if it's meant to be, it will happen. I think the theories were doing more than carrying the comedy, not because they were true, because the characters needed them to be. They don't feel like just sitcom jokes anymore. They feel familiar. It also isn't a coincidence that so many of them revolve around love. Most of these theories end up circling the same question. Can love actually be predicted? Take the olive theory. Marshall tells Ted that the reason he and Lily work is because one of them loves olives and the other doesn't. Their differences somehow balance each other out. It's a funny idea, but it's not really about olives. It's about how reassuring it is to believe that two people fit together for a reason, instead of wondering if they just got lucky. Then there's the reacher and settler theory. Every relationship has someone who's reaching above their league, and someone who's settling for less than they could have. The theory taps into something very human, our desire to categorize things that are too complicated to define, especially love. But the uncomfortable part is that the moment we label one person the reacher and the other the settler, we aren't just explaining the relationship, we're judging it. The window theory is different. It's the idea that some people spend almost all their lives in relationships, leaving only a tiny window when they're actually available. It's not about finding the right person. It's about being free at the right moment. That's less romantic than most love stories, but somehow more comforting. Every theory looks at love from a different angle, but they all come from the same place. They're trying to make love feel like something you can figure out. Because the truth kind of sucks. Sometimes two people seem perfect for each other, and it still doesn't work. The timing is wrong or people change. Sometimes there isn't a clear reason at all. And maybe that's the part we struggle with the most. The show didn't create the idea of turning love into theories. It just gave those ideas names. When you think about it, we do this in real life too. We talk about soulmates, right person, wrong time, meeting someone when you least expect it. Different phrases, but same idea. We're always trying to find a reason that our feelings make sense. Not every theory in this show is actually about love. Some of them live one step earlier, in the moment before you even know if this person is going to mean everything to you or nothing at all. Why does someone suddenly become interesting and give you butterflies? Or why the exact same behavior can feel romantic one day and unsettling the next? Remember the Mermaid Theory? This is one of Barney's hilarious ideas. He argues that if you spend enough time around someone, eventually you'll start seeing them as attractive. It's a comedic exaggeration, until you stop and think about it for a second. Most of us have had someone we barely noticed at first, right? Then you end up seeing them every day. You talk a little more, laugh at the same things, and one day, without anything dramatic happening, they just look different. Maybe that's why Barney comes up with the theory in the first place. We've all looked back and wondered, wait, when did I start liking this person? It's easier to believe attraction follows a rule than to admit it sometimes just happens. Then there's the Dobler-Dahmer theory, which might be one of the smartest ideas the show ever came up with. If both people are into each other, then a big romantic gesture works. Dobler. But if one person isn't into the other, the same gesture comes off serial killer crazy. Dahmer. The theory reveals something interesting about attraction. It doesn't just change how we feel about someone, it changes how we interpret everything they do. The same gesture or same grand confession can feel thoughtful or completely overwhelming. We don't always see actions objectively. The way we feel about someone often shapes the meaning we attach to what they do. Maybe that's why the theory feels so uncomfortably true. It's not saying attraction changes people's behavior. It's saying attraction changes the meaning we give that behavior. And that same idea applies to appearance too. The cheerleader effect suggests that individual members of a group appear more attractive together than they do on their own. It sounds like another one of Barney's ridiculous observations, but it points to something our brains do all the time. We almost never see people in isolation. We notice the people around them, the energy of the group, or even the feeling of the moment. Let's not forget another fictional dating rule Barney introduced, the hot crazy scale. It's a literal graph, hot on one axis, crazy on the other, built on a single rule. A person is allowed to be crazy as long as they are equally hot. It's obviously exaggerated, and that's part of the joke. But what's interesting is how confidently Barney presents it, as if he's uncovered some universal law. The graph tells us very little about women, though. It's more like Barney's way of pretending attraction follows predictable rules. Because if relationships can be reduced to a graph, then they're no longer unpredictable. Heartbreak feels less random, and rejection feels less personal. The theory doesn't actually make dating simpler. It just makes uncertainty feel easier to control. Some of its most memorable rules are not just about love and attraction. They're trying to answer a different question. Can rules save us from regret? I'm sure you remember the episode, Nothing Good Happens After 2 a.m. Ted repeats his mother's advice. After 2 in the morning, nothing good happens. Go home, go to bed, and don't make important decisions. But the show isn't really blaming the clock. 2 in the morning is really just shorthand for a version of ourselves we've probably all met before. The one running on too little sleep, too much emotion, and just enough confidence to think, this time will be different. That's the mistake Ted ends up making, not because he stayed awake, but because he trusted his judgment at the exact moment he probably shouldn't have. Maybe that's why the rule still feels familiar outside the show. We rarely regret a decision because of the time it happened. We regret the person we were when we made it. The late-night text and the impulsive phone call, or the conversation that could have waited until morning. The time was never really the point. The state of mind was. And then there's Barney's lemon law. It's a dating rule that he comes up with that allows either person to end a date within the first 5 minutes with no hard feelings. Like many of his theories, he presents it as a way to avoid wasting time. But I don't think it's only about efficiency. Time almost feels like an excuse. It's everything that comes with those extra hours. The awkward conversations, the growing hope that maybe things will get better, only to realize you've been investing in something that was never going anywhere. While it's meant to be a punchline, it actually captures that gut-level intuition we all have. We've all been on that date where the vibe feels off before the menus are even open, yet we stick it out anyway because it feels rude to leave, or because we're hoping our first impression is wrong. 5 minutes is an exaggeration, though, but maybe the real idea was never about leaving early. It was about recognizing those moments when we already know the answer, but still try to convince ourselves otherwise. Then there's the platinum rule. Barney's version is simple. Never, ever, ever love thy neighbor. Not literally your neighbor, but anyone who's already part of your everyday life. Your coworker, or someone you can't easily avoid once the relationship is over. To prove his point, Barney even breaks it down into 8 stages, almost like he's presenting a scientific formula. Attraction, bargaining, convincing yourself it's somehow a good idea. Submission, when you finally give in. Perks, where everything feels exciting. Then comes the tipping point, when cracks start to show. Purgatory, confrontation. Then, fallout. According to Barney, dating someone you see every day always follows the same path, and it always ends the same way. What's interesting is that the theory isn't really asking whether the relationship will work. Barney almost assumes you'll fall for them anyway. His attention is somewhere else. He's already thinking about what happens if it doesn't. That's probably why the rule feels so practical. Most of us have our own version of it. Don't date a coworker. Don't date within your friend group. They're less about choosing the right person and more about protecting the parts of your life that might get pulled into the breakup. But future Ted quietly adds a 9th stage, coexistence. Eventually, enough time passes. The awkwardness fades and the resentment softens. You learn how to exist in the same room again without carrying the weight of everything that happened before. This somehow says, not every relationship ends well, but not every ending stays painful forever either. Sometimes there isn't a rule that saves you from the fallout. Time simply does what no theory can. That got me thinking about all the other theories in the show. At first, they felt like they were answering different questions. Some try to explain why people fall in love. Others try to explain why relationships fall apart, or how you're supposed to know you found the right person. But the more time I spent looking at them, the less they felt like separate ideas. I don't think they were ever trying to answer different questions. They kept showing up whenever life stopped making sense for a minute. Sometimes before someone made a choice, or while everything was unfolding. Sometimes long after the damage had already been done. The theories almost never appear when everything is going well. They show up after a bad decision or after a grand gesture goes completely wrong. Sometimes they're just people sitting around trying to explain something that doesn't seem to have a satisfying explanation. And somehow, instead of saying, "I don't know why that happened," someone comes up with a rule or a dating law, a theory everyone can laugh about for the next 5 minutes. Not because it changes what happened, it doesn't. The theory just gives the conversation somewhere to go, something everyone can point to, joke about, and carry with them while they're still trying to figure out what comes next. And maybe that's what every How I Met Your Mother theory was really doing all along. Every theory in How I Met Your Mother is a comedic coping mechanism. Whenever life refuses to give the characters a satisfying answer, they don't sit with the uncertainty. They turn it into a theory they can laugh about instead. The strange part isn't that How I Met Your Mother had so many theories. It's that so many of us still carry them around. I don't think it's because they made life easier to understand. Life has a habit of proving almost every one of them wrong. People still surprise us. Timing still gets in the way. Sometimes the ending doesn't make sense, even years later. But that's exactly why the theories mattered. They remind us that trying to make sense of our lives is part of living them. That sitting around after something falls apart, replaying it from every angle, searching for one sentence that makes it all click, is the only way we know how to cope. Maybe that's why the writers never stopped inventing another rule. Not because they believed life could be explained, because they understood that until we're ready to let something go, we'll keep looking for an explanation anyway. And somehow, turning that search into a joke, made it feel a little easier to carry. Maybe none of these theories were ever supposed to be right. Maybe they were just meant to help us through the parts of life that don't have clear answers. If one of them ever did that for you, I'd love to hear which one. Thanks for paying attention.